So, yeah, welcome everybody to our panel discussion today. We're talking about HR digital transformation. And you probably wonder, as much as a lot of other people do, what is digital transformation all about? Yeah, and what do you need to know? And I took the liberty to Google, and you find like 500,000 entries. So that's a lot.
Wow.
Right? Probably too much to scan in a lifetime. So we are here to shine some light on the different aspects on this question, while being hopefully more specific to our line of work in HR. And therefore, I'm very delighted to introduce to you a panel of experts in this field. So please welcome with me, and in alphabetical order first names, Andi Britt, Vice President of Talent and Engagement Europe at IBM. Chris Havrilla, who will hopefully join soon, Vice President of HR Technology and Solution Provider Strategy and Research at Bersin Deloitte. Jeff Smith, Founder and CEO of SupportingLines Institute. Manisha Singh, Global Director of Digital HR Transformation at Schneider Electric. And myself, Toennissen, Head of Digital Technologies at Bayer. So I would like to give each of the panelists a chance to introduce them by themselves shortly, 2 minutes, maybe a few sentences about yourself. Andi, do you want to start?
Yes, of course, Jan. Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So my name is Andi Britt. So I work for IBM, obviously a large global technology company, which employs 375,000 staff. And I lead our consulting practice in Europe for HR, what we call our talent and transformation practice. And that's all of the consulting expertise we bring to our clients, whether it's around HR strategy, digital HR, or whether it's around specific areas like talent acquisition, talent development, and HR outsourcing. And I particularly have an interest in how artificial intelligence and automation, these emerging technologies, are really going to transform and help us rethink or reinvent the way that we do human resources. And I'm looking forward to talking about that later on the call.
Thank you very much, Andi. So we skipped Chris for a moment. So Jeff, do you want to continue?
Sure. So I've traveled probably a bit of a more winding road to HR. I'm a former CFO and COO. I like to say I'm a recovering C-suite executive. And I was also the head of sales for a billion-dollar helicopter company. SupportingLines is a company I'm in now. We really focus on helping companies cultivate high-performance organizations. And what we mean by that, high performance is often a term that's sort of vague. So we believe performance is achieving goals, high performance is achieving more goals while having a great human experience. So technology is a big part of that, especially as it pertains to helping teams align and collaborate. We also focus on helping people grow. So yeah, super excited to be part of the panel today. I think we'll bring an interesting perspective to some of this.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So we just got a new visitor. It's Chris. So Chris, I already made the introduction. How about you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Yes, I'm the tech girl who had trouble getting in. So I'm Chris Havrilla. I'm with Bersin, Deloitte Consulting. I run two practices. One is around HR technology and how we use HR technology as a catalyst for transformation and reinvention of fundamentally everything that has to do with people in an organization. And I also run a practice doing research strategy and advisory as well for the vendors who serve that community. So I have a huge interest in how we transform HR, how we transform the world of work, the future of talent, and using technology as a catalyst, but not as the total solution. So I'm really looking forward to being a part of this panel. It's a very special topic to me in how we change the world of work.
Thank you, Chris. So last but not least, Manisha.
Hello, everyone who's joined our conference. I'm Manisha. I lead the digital HR transformation and people analytics practice at Schneider Electric. We are again a global company, 150,000 employees spread in 100+ countries. So we have our own nuances. We at Schneider Electric believe that great people make Schneider a great company. And my role at Schneider is really to help HR accelerate that people vision. I have worked with Schneider in laying out our employee experience strategy, our digital learning roadmap, talent digitization program, AI and robotics in HR. So all the things that experts are thinking, writing, talking about in terms of trends, really how do you get it into the organization step by step, and how do you unlock the value for employees in HR? Last but not least, I'm very passionate about ethics in AI, because I think as HR use cases of AI, we will have to be really conscious about that. And so I'm proactively working with thought leaders in that domain, and I'm volunteering in MIT Future of Work Task Force. I believe future is human, powered by digital.
Perfect.
Back to you, John.
Thank you, Manisha. Yeah, to quickly complete the round, just a sentence to me. So I'm with Bayer for over 10 years now, taking care about different transformational projects, from operating model to digitalization, mostly on HR or IT side. And I'm currently leading a global team of IT enthusiasts, scouting and scaling digital technologies. And our current main focus is on automation. We automate mainly in our shared service centers. And yeah, we're trying to be there as intelligent as possible. So there's a lot of change also in how you deal with the situation from a people perspective, and how you convince people to go a long way with you, because it's a continuous effort that we want to put in there. Yeah, so thank you very much for the introduction. I think it's time that we start with something tangible. So let's come to the question: what does digital transformation for you mean in the context of HR? Maybe Jeff, do you want to start?
Sure. I think there's so much in that. I think there's two things that you need to look at. One is, what is the transformation? So as some of my fellow panelists here have said, the transformation's first. And I like that, you know, that whole notion of it's humans and then it's digital. So the digital's enabling humans to do something. So a lot of times when we're doing transformation, I'm sure we've all seen cases where people have used software to try to solve a problem, but they haven't really fixed the problem. So I think the transformation first and foremost is that's critically important. It's how do you know it's done? So how would you, I'm big on measurement given my background. So how would you measure that you're done? How would you know that you've actually had that transformation take place? And I think as it comes to digital, again, a lot of people focus on, you know, I think they get caught by the bright, shiny object of the digital piece, the fancy software, which is super important. But the thing is, again, I always tell the clients we work with, get the process hammered out almost manually first. Get it working first, you know who's doing what. Because once you actually start to put, you know, digital and technology around a process, it really starts to become codified, and it gets much harder to change it. So I think it's really about, you know, what is the transformation? Then you look at the digital piece.
Thank you, Jeff. Because we figured out that probably Andy cannot hear what Jeff is saying in this call.
That's good.
Maybe we switch over to Andy and hear Andy's perspective on what actually is digital transformation for HR. And then Jeff mentioned a few things about how to measure it from his perspective. So maybe you can also add a few sentences towards that aspect.
Don't tell Andy what else I said, though.
Oh, Andy, we actually can't hear you now.
Right, you can.
Now we cannot.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm sorry. The risk is that I either repeat what Jeff said or can contradict. So hopefully I'll be brief, and then you can stop me via the chat if I do. So for me, digital sort of HR actually starts with the consumer grade expectations that most workers in the workplace today have when they can't come to work. You know, they expect their interactions with their employer to be as intuitive and easy to use as using their iPhones. So, you know, they're asking questions like, you know, why can't learning at work be like binge watching Netflix? You know, why can't I map my career the way that I would map my ride or my run on Strava? You know, why can't I kind of map out my career or my next role the way that I can book a taxi on Uber? So, you know, today's workforce expecting consumer grade experiences, and digital HR is, in essence, the HR's response to that. How do we design HR processes around the employee. And that's why design thinking is increasingly going to be part of the toolkit of us rethinking every single aspect of the employee's life cycle, from onboarding to learning to performance management, and designing it in a way that suits the employee and goes with the grain of our personality and our organizational psychology, not designing it in a way around an HR process. So that's the exciting challenge. How do you measure it? Ultimately, for me, you measure it through Net Promoter Score. You ask your employees, look, how was that onboarding experience? How was your performance management experience? What was it like to leave the company? And they feed back to you how rich an experience it was. So NPS is a great way of measuring digital HR. Jeff, I hope that didn't contradict what you said.
No, it's all good.
No, it didn't. Yeah, Manisha, we also talked about in our pre-call a bit, how does it actually help the business, right? How does it relate to the business? And how does which role does HR play in there? Maybe you want to bring a bit more in this area, shed a light on it.
Sure. In HR, we are always asked the question that, okay, digital is fine, but how will you create value? So the real part is that today the digital forces are setting a context, not just digital, but economic and socio-political forces are setting a context in which our businesses have to change very rapidly. They have to iterate, they have intense competition. The half-life of business is becoming from 50 to 30 to actually 15 years for Fortune 500 company. So that's the context in which our businesses are operating. And they need to reinvent their business models, which means they need to reinvent how people within businesses are working. And for people within businesses, if the way they are working needs to be more collaborative, more agile, more innovation, then HR needs to put such systems and technology and enabling processes in place that can allow people to work like that, so that ultimately business can deliver and change in the way market wants them to. So it's all interlinked. The external forces are demanding that business changes, and business cannot transform at the speed if HR is not enabling that. And digital HR is the most disruptive tool HR has at hand to enable that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Manisha. And Chris, do you see that most of their clients, they have this kind of thought like we need to be a stronger enabler. We utilize digital transformation to get the best out of the business. Is that what most companies are after?
I think they are. It's just the mindset shift that has kind of the struggle is real, so to speak. I think a lot of people in HR have continued to feel the need to be experts, right? Experts in everything, have the answers, do all of this stuff. And the thing that I'm trying to write about more is just getting into that mindset shift of how do you focus on the business, right? How do you solve problems, right? It's really more of an engagement model than an expert model. It's more of a facilitator, and Andy's exactly right. It's how do we solve complex business problems? How do we use a methodology like design thinking to help get to the answers, get the right people involved, stay focused on the outcomes, and not needing to be the expert, but maybe if you're going to be an expert in something, it's who do you bring to the table to to solve for these issues, keeping the outcome in mind. So yes, while I believe in theory that people are there, I think we're still stuck in kind of this expert mindset where we have to come with the answers, and then we're just focused on what we know, right, versus where we're trying to get to. So I think that's the mindset shift that I've been writing about to try to help kind of lay that groundwork for people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So when you see this massive change across the company, across the ecosystem, actually, I guess you want to anchor it somewhere in your company's strategy. And do you have any feeling, any ideas for where it should be placed, how it should be placed, who's driving it?
Yeah, so I think most organizations are realizing that speed is the new business competence. Organizations used to think, look, we've got a great product, we've got a great brand, we've got a great distribution networks. But I think in today's competitive business environment, they're realizing if we can't do things quickly, if we can't do things fast, then actually we're not going to be in business. Therefore, I think most organizations are having to reinvent their culture. You know, agile is an example of one of the kind of practices and tools that organizations are trying to implement. And agile doesn't just teach new ways of working. It actually teaches you a new language. You talk about sprints, you talk about stand-ups, and then you have axioms or messages like, you know, everything we develop here is in a permanent state of beta. Everything we do is rapid iteration. So you get people to think differently about doing things fast, or as some organizations say, you know, the perfect is the enemy of good. Velocity is better than perfection. And so it's this kind of language and conversation that begins to change your culture. Who owns it? Ultimately, it's got to come from your CEO. But I think the HR director has a really key role to play in kind of creating some of the performance mechanisms, some of the language, some of the training programs, so that all of us start to think differently and talk differently to our colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andy. And Jeff, how do you support it?
Well, I think there's one thing I'd like to sort of throw in here too. I think that when we talk about the role of HR and we talk about how HR, you know, you look at transformation and these things, I think one of the core fundamental pieces too is, you know, what does HR even mean? And specifically, you hear the term a lot of times. I have a lot of people that say, oh, I'm in strategic HR. And so when I ask them what the strategic part means, people really struggle with what that is. And so I think that we're focused on alignment, collaboration, those sorts of things. And I think there's a huge role for strategic HR to be focused on helping teams define some of these, you know, commitments between teams. When we set planning, we don't just focus on goals. We also look at what are these commitments we need to have across the organization? What are the cross-functional teams that need to be focused on helping us achieve the most important work? Because the biggest thing is a lot of times it's not defined, and that's what makes cross-functional hard. So I think that it calls into question what is strategic HR, and I think that part of the answer to that question is I actually think that from an HR standpoint, we've spent way more time in the past on the R part than the human part, and I think we need to spend more time on the human part. And one example would be if you look at performance conversations. A lot of companies define their performance conversation process now about it not being an annual appraisal, or it's not this, it's not that. Whereas I think if you look at, you know, as Andy was saying, a lot of what needs to come from, they need to have in these things comes from the CEO and the top. But the other thing is we need to be looking, as he also said earlier, about the employee experience. What is the employee's experience of a performance conversation? And what is even the point of it? You know, is it about appraisals and putting things into the sort of resource mindset of the past? Or is it more about helping people grow, which is more the human part that I'd say is the future? So I think a lot of this, what we're talking about, I think it fundamentally calls into question, what is strategic HR, and how do we really get the H going a little more than we have in the past?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeff. And maybe somebody can start with saying something about what is actually needed for this transformation. So where do we where do we start? What tools do we need? We talked about mindset. So obviously there are a lot of different aspects that are necessary to move forward successfully. Well, what advice, what ideas can you give to start with?
You know, I'll start just by saying, you know, what's not needed first, and that's really just this concept that technology, you know, is not the solution, right? You know, people I think have often thought that technology, you know, is a solution, but you know, really tools don't solve problems, people do. You know, but they do it with tech and tools in hand, right? You know, it plays a huge critical role as a driver, a disruptor, as a catalyst for change, you know, as an enabler, as much as I detest that word. But no invention or reinvention is done without it, right? But I think once you have that kind of thought in mind and you realize technology is not the answer, it's going to be the tool that you use to do it. You know, the whole body of work I just did around tech strategy is really the thing that people have to focus on. You know, you've got to have a strategy, and a strategy is simply just a plan of action designed to achieve some goal or major outcome. And for me, the keys then are, where are you today? Where do you want to be, and what is that plan to get there? And I'm always stunned with the billions and billions and billions of dollars that we spend on HR tech and things like that to do these digital transformations or whatever, and there's no strategy involved. And I think the key there, again, is that current state and that future state. And the future state, the thing I really want to just kind of drill in as what is needed is you can't just do what's desirable, right? I mean, everybody wants the world, but you also have to think about what's feasible and what's viable. What can you actually build, and what can you profitably deliver, or at least invest in to get the cost or value out of? And then I think the third part in that is, part of the survey work that I did, I realized very few people had kind of a picture of their world, some kind of, visual representation of their current tech and systems and current processes and data flows, so that they can get to these outcomes, but also to see in an easy way, right, where their gaps are, where their overlaps are, where their roadblocks and bottlenecks are that's causing this pain, right, in the organization, and also just having a single view of everything and how it starts to come together, so you can solution for that future state. And I think those are the most critical things that people need to start that transformation process, and then they can start to get people involved in what the solutions are.
Mm-hmm. So you said it's not starting with the tech; it's starting with a strategy. It's starting with the people, shifting the mindset. I think Manisha also had an example about an open talent market, bringing new ideas in, being open for change. Do you want to elaborate a bit on that?
If I can step back and share the Schneider example, like Schneider Electric, we were into manufacturing of electrical product. Now we're positioning or pivoting over the last 7 years into being a digital company, which is into energy automation. So making the world energy efficient and empowering the digital economy. From that vision of the business emerged the people strategy that we need an organization where we have people who are able to sell connected digital solutions to our customers, people who can build those solutions. So as Jeff was saying, we needed to redefine how various teams will work. What will be that new org structure, org design? What will be the new way of leading in the digital world? So Schneider HR actually took out a white paper saying leadership in the digital age. And one of the examples from that was that free up your 30% time so that you can learn from the market. You need to learn every day. You need to learn from your customers. You need to learn about technology and trends. And if you don't have time, then there's no way you're learning and evolving. The leadership in the digital age, and then we actually re-looked at our employee value proposition, that what is already working for Schneider. So we think our purpose is very meaningful, which means we are into energy efficiency, right? It's good for planet, good for business, good for everybody. So we retain that. But to be able to fly successfully in this digital era, we need to become more innovative company. And from that, the two new value proposition came: inclusive, which means diverse, viewpoints, which is so necessary for innovation, and empowered. So from there, we actually talked about how can we create similar opportunities for employee internally within Schneider, like they are having already at LinkedIn or in the open marketplace. And to what our Andi, Jeff, and Chris were alluding earlier, that we didn't start with technology solution in the mind. We had the problem, which is like, how can we create career opportunities, enable upskilling, give people chances to work across diverse skill sets and develop it. And from that problem, when we were brainstorming, we thought about this AI-driven marketplace, and we called it open because we internally aligned to say, it will be open. If I'm in my job for 3 months and I don't like it in Schneider and I want to change, the open market allows me. So it's not that a technology has come in and then the policy prevents me to change that and asks me to stay in my job for 2 years. So it's a combination of a true problem to solve, rethinking your HR processes, cluster of processes, in this case, internal mobility, career skilling all together, and then trying to bring in a technology in a way that it augments the experience of employees.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Manisha. And I guess that goes into the direction of the second question from Andrew. How have you seen HR technologies to pay off or play a role in helping drive the culture change? So does it maybe also tickle a bit when you have now all this new technology at your hands, AI, based on machine learning, natural language processing, and so on? Of course, it creates some more use cases, opportunities, right? So does it also maybe help sometimes to get things through the door?
Well, you would hope that your technologies are going to make the organization a better place to work. When you're assessing technology, you're trying to understand, is it going to make me more productive? Is it going to give me greater insights into the work I do? Is it going to actually take away some of the administration that frustrates me? Or is it going to give me some personalized information that I couldn't have before? And if you direct technology in those directions or assess it in the basis of, productivity versus cost efficiency, then you'll find it actually creates a better work environment for your people. That in turn, I think, leads to culture change. But I wouldn't necessarily start with using technology to change culture. I would start by, how do we use technology to make my life easier, more simple? Mm-hmm. Let me give you an example. In most organizations, you have a process for submitting your expenses and getting your expenses approved. And, it goes to your manager has to review them, and eventually, your expenses are approved, and eventually a few weeks later, you get paid. Well, what if you could automate that whole process? What if you could get some analytics AI at the back end to review it and automatically approve it if your expenses meet the established expenses criteria of the organization? That way it makes my life easier. I submit my expenses and then I'm paid the following weeks because there's no need for manager approval. That's the kind of example I think we need to be looking for in our organizations, just to make life simpler.
I totally agree with that. I think that's a huge thing, but I don't want to skirt too far away from his question, because I think people are trying, desperately to do cultural change, right? When you think about all these big disruptions that are happening, and whether it's demographics, whether it's technology, whether it's these business model shifts. Manisha brought this up earlier. The average lifespan on the S&P 500 index is literally 15 years now, right? You can't ignore these things anymore. And, I've done some work around the cultural archetypes that we're seeing in organizations, and I've written about this even on IBM's Smarter Workforce site, in terms of the different, kind of cultural archetypes and how you can innovate in each one. You may have that outcome, but in these different cultural archetypes, you're going to have to go about how you do this transformational change differently. But I think once you do that, once you realize what that is, it's like everything else. You have this as an outcome, and if your outcome is to be more innovative or to be able to be more agile, or whatever it is, you still have to start with that outcome in mind, understand why you're doing it, what it is, why you're trying to do it, and then put that strategy around it. But I think technology is, again, whether it's a catalyst, an enabler, whatever, it is going to be very rooted in how you go to solve that problem. But you have to start to remember, people are the ones that solve the problem, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got to kind of go through this model. And the other part of his question was kind of what I was starting to go down the road with, that kind of that expert model versus an engagement model, where we're not so focused on compliance and we're focused on solving problems. But that's, it's the root of a lot of the work I'm doing. So Andrew, I'm glad to send you some links for some of that stuff. But I think it's an important question, because how we get to these outcomes that the business is anchoring in our people and our tech strategy. It's, the struggle is real, but that's how we're going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris.
I think that there's a couple things that I think, well, there's a whole bunch of great stuff in there that I'll pick up on. I won't repeat some of the things you said, but I really like the fact that, again, we're focused on this transformation comes first. And I think the one nice thing about, back to the question, like one of the nice things about the technology is that if you get it right, it is a visible sign that you are listening and trying to make a culture shift. So it's right there. It's something that's visible. People have to use it. But it's also a system. And Manisha was talking about this concept of like you put something in place and then it evolves. So I can give you a quick scenario of how that worked around performance conversations for us. We knew we wanted to change our performance conversations in the company where I was COO. And so what we did was we made the shift to less of an appraisal-based one and more of a, the development goal was the outcome. So we did it was literally the first iteration was in Google Docs. We got it working. Then we bought software. Then we got the software, and then people, as they started using it, they wanted to change the way it worked, but we couldn't do that with that tool. So we actually had to, about a year later, shift to a different performance conversation tool. And then from there, the next evolution was we noticed that the tool was now working, but there was something else with the process that needed to change. So we refined how much feedback people had to give. So now you're back to actually a people process, less technology. But then the final thing, which brought us back full circle, that I guess shows that that's a system, is that after we go through all this technology stuff, we rolled it out, we've got it all working, the outcome of our performance conversation was people had to create a development goal. And so it turned out that 11% of people had a development goal in the system. So as COO, I took it upon myself to say, okay, everyone needs to start getting development goals in the system. What we quickly realized is that out of compliance, people started putting them in. So we were at 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%. I'm thinking amazing. Then I started looking at the development goals, and I realized instantly that people really didn't know what a development goal was. So you have the salesperson that says, my development goal is to close my quota. It's like, well, actually, that's not. How would you do that as the development part? What is different? What skills do you need to acquire? So at that point, we're back to a people process again. So I think the key thing is that this cultural shift, technology plays a key role. It really does. It's certainly a really visible part, but it's part of a system. And you'll find yourself iterating between culture and process and software, and back to workflow, and then back to capabilities. Like it's a system. So it'll just keep evolving that way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeff. Now we're talking about HR in this digital transformation. So how much do you think HR should and could be a role model? And where do you see HR currently? So how far are most of the HR organizations in that mindset shift, in the application of new ways of working and so on? Maybe Andy, what do you see from your clients?
Yeah. So from a number of C-suite studies that we've done over the last 10 to 15 years, it is an unfortunate fact that the CEO looks to the CHRO and the HR function typically last. You will often go to the CFO first, the CIO, Chief Procurement, Chief Marketing Officer, and then at the bottom of the list is the Chief Human Resources Officer. And and that is a sad reflection, I'm afraid, of the impact that a lot of HR functions have had historically. But I do think that we are at a potential tipping point here, because most organizations have got to reinvent themselves. Given the the disruption in the marketplace, they've as Manisha was talking about with Schneider, you've got to reinvent your business. Ultimately, the way that you're going to do that is through the skills, the behavior, and the performance of your people. So I think the HR leadership have got to step up and say, we can help reinvent this company. Once the direction of travel has been established, we can create the environment, provide the performance measures, create the learning, recruit the right type of people, whether we're going to buy or build the skills, and say we can create the future of the organization, and we're going to be pivotal to it. lot of organizations currently are deciding, you know, we need to be a tech organization, or we need to be a digital organization rather than being a bank or a retailer or a CPG client. It's the HR function that is going to enable that. And they've got to have the intelligence and the strategy to say, how do we reinvent, reskill the workforce in, and they've only got about 18 months to do it. So, you know, now is our time in HR. The question is, does HR have the skill, the reputation, and the trust in the business to do it?
Or the desire to make the change and build those muscle sets, right? Because it's not easy. I mean, you know, our data at Bersin is showing that, you know, part of the biggest challenge is, you know, that the C-suite is still working in silos, you know, where we're starting to work more as a network of teams at a doing level. They're still very rooted in silos. And, you know, you have like all the, you know, responsibility and none of the authority, right? So, you know, what is the muscle set that it's going to take to kind of facilitate that symphonic C-suite to drive, you know, when you're talking about transformation, you're talking about massive change, you know, incremental change is no longer acceptable, right? And so to do that, it is going to come top down eventually, but it's going to be, you know, business driven and HR led. You know, I think he's spot on. It's like, this is HR's time, but you know, you got to have the desire and the chops and the muscle set, and that's where things like having structured methodologies like a design thinking or agile, or, you know, that can help you drive that kind of change and go through the, you know, the process of iterations and getting buy-in and getting feedback and iterating so that you can come up with a proof of concept that's scalable and able to be delivered. But it's going to take as much desire as it is anything else. And I loved even the point Jeff was making earlier about the you know, learning is like a constant thing, and that's going to be a constant part of this muscle set, because you're not going to be experts anymore. So who do you bring in? What do you do? What, you know, how do you start to facilitate this process? And love some of the examples that Manisha is showing. I mean, it's doable, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris.
And if I can chime in into this conversation, what I was saying is, all of you have said that it is important to come down from the business vision, right? The strategy, and then how the people strategy can support it. I just want to give a practical tip of, let's say if your business vision is still evolving and you are a forward-thinking HR person, how you can still lead that. So you can, because you are aware that, you know, no matter which part or segment of the organization you are in, the future is more digital, more collaborative, more transparent, multi-generational workforce. This is a reality for all of us. And seamless experience, productivity, engagement, well-being, kindness at workplace. These are some things that you're already aware about. So how do you look at your HR digital roadmap and pivot or balance two things? I always try to say, let's secure the present. So optimize the productivity by optimizing current tool sets, and that gives you a seat on the table. That at least helps you earn the reputation if you can automate and take away the inefficiency, generate some productivity. And when you get that seat on the table, that's the time for you to help shape the future disruptive capabilities of digital HR, or those kind of new tools or processes which can enable you accelerate the push forward in future. So balancing, securing the present tool sets and shaping the future, and taking both along has been something which has worked for us at Schneider a lot, even within a capability and also at the larger roadmap level. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Manisha. Can you also add something to the point? I mean, a lot of companies, a lot of HR organizations are starting now. How do you measure whether you actually move forward? Yeah, and is there an endpoint, or is it more like a continuous development, improvement, reiteration thing?
Yeah, I think the old language around a start point or a change program that has a fixed endpoint, I think that's old school thinking. You know, everything we do in the corporation is in a permanent state of beta. We are constantly developing, refining, iterating what we do. I mean, you still need bursts and you still need sprints to make change happen, but you know, I don't think there is an end state. And when you get there, there'll still be things to do. You won't be competitive in the market. The market will have changed. I mean, the world is never going to be this slow again, guys. So we've got to, we've got to be prepared to change.
I think measurement is huge. Like, man, it's a huge part of what we do. We believe that you start with the measurement we look at. It's interesting. Actually, this probably segues into also this topic of, it's HR's time. So a lot of times you think about employee engagement as an example of being something that is, often the HR department. We have what I'm not aware of another model that has shown to be that it's predictive of engagement, but we have something that is like almost straight line predictive of engagement in our research. And what it comes down to is people being clear on expectations, but also how people are involved in planning. And specifically, it's how people are involved in defining and shaping the commitments to the work that they need from other people to be able to achieve their goals. And so if you think about that from it's HR's time, it becomes clear very soon that we look at, I think traditionally finance, maybe operations are running the goal setting process. So they would look at defining outcomes. What are the most important things that we need to do this year to achieve our strategy? I think there's a big role for HR to be, the sort of HR, it's our time concept. There's a huge role for HR to help map out these connections, because the traditional reporting lines org chart has absolutely nothing to do, almost nothing to do with achieving cross-functional goals, which all the biggest goals in a company by definition are. So there's a different org chart. So you look at the big objectives, you look at the people that hold those, but then the people that hold all the work that goes into achieving those, that's actually your org chart in terms of how you achieve your work. The problem for most organizations is not visible. So making that org chart visible, to me, is a huge role for HR, because there's a functional org chart that has nothing to do with traditional reporting lines and silos, but it has everything to do with the way we achieve our goals, which is what you need to do to be fast. It's what you need to do to stay on the S&P for year 16, right? It's what you need to do to be able to thrive. And so I think there's a massive role for HR in the middle of that, but I'm not sure that that people see it that way. And all those things are measurable, right? And we not only are they measurable in terms of are these pieces in place, but they are also, like, this performance stuff is straight line predictive of engagement. Most people focus on engagement to get performance. I'm not aware of data that shows that that's the case. It's the other way around.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Can maybe somebody also point out a bit, now we talked about transformation, but what are the pitfalls that you have seen and you can recommend to avoid by paying attention to them? Manisha, did you encounter any issues, any things where you said, looking backwards, we would have done that differently?
It's always, as most of you are saying, that change is the only constant, and what we're doing is something that we weren't aware of, so that we are very sure of the results we are getting. So we are constantly learning, and some of the pitfalls is change management and mindset around these. Like, let's say open talent market is a great success story. We managed to bring that. We unlocked the project hours for a company like Schneider. People are volunteering and trying to do project, like people from HR are doing project in digital marketing, in audit, finance, and people from business are doing project and across businesses and all that. So umpteen project hours are unlocked, but at the same time, there is a change management around who's playing what role, and what's happening around these projects and productivity. And what's one of the core reasons we brought it was to get people more job opportunities also. Are those really happening to the extent, or they are really happening still in the personal networks or the human network, despite the best EI? So how do we work around these? You have to continuously look at insights that you're generating from these consumerized experience and see whether it's solving your problem or it's creating a new set of problems. Mm-hmm. And then trying to keep those insights in mind, you have to continuously evolve your change management plan around the tool.
Mm-hmm. I'll piggyback on that. The change management is huge. We often bring in technology, but we don't change how we work or how work is done. I think we fall into this trap of thinking that organizations are machines, and it's all about input, process, output, and not prompts and humans and, I mean, this is about people and behaviors and it still goes back to, it's a simple concept of the fact that, tools don't solve problems, but people do. But that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people and behaviors. And the other pitfalls that I see is, besides lack of strategy, which we talked about already, is a lack of willingness to do the work. Like, we often kind of lift and shift what we've, how we've always worked, right, into these new tools and technologies. And again, like, some of the things that we have to do, somebody put language, what is our common language around people and how we work and how work gets done? And, are we using a common language? And, are we, have we rationalized our data, because that is our language, right? Data is the new currency. But are we still dealing with hundreds and hundreds of fields that we're trying to capture? Because that's why systems have become the work, and we've lost sight of what the work actually is. Have we done the work to optimize processes? Do we even know what the work is? We talk a lot about rethinking and reimagining work, but I don't think we have a handle on what the work actually is. And that's the key to understanding, what can machines do? What, where can we access talent? Is it in a full-time, equivalence, or is this, the alternative workforce that we can tap into, or, machines and creating hybrid jobs? But all of these things are rooted in understanding what the work is and where the redundancies are and where the inefficiencies are. And, that doing the work to kind of simplify these things and not using a lens of, and I think we've all said this to one degree today, is how are we making somebody's life easier? How are we making their work easier? How are we making their outcomes that they're supposed to achieve easier to get to? How is all this technology, is it adding more complexity, or is it actually simplifying things? And are people connected to their work? Do they understand the impact that they have and the value that they're bringing? And does that work have meaning to them? So I think those are all pitfalls that people fall into, not focusing on those things.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, Chris, that's a great point. And I think just to build on that point, I mean, I love, a common pitfall is just not asking the end users, thinking that what the end users need, failing to co-create a solution with the people who are actually going to be using it day in, day out. And we have a kind of phrase in IBM that we often use, that whenever we're doing a new project, we want to get as many people in to be involved in designing it, because nobody thinks their baby is ugly. So if you get your users to say, you design this, whether it's a performance management process or it's the expense process or the travel, you get them to design it, and hopefully they'll be more bought in. So that's the first pitfall. Make sure you co-create. The second one is just don't make it too big and complex. Start simple, start small, minimal viable product. Solve one simple problem. Get that right and iterate it, and then you can scale, but don't try and solve the whole thing.
I'm a big believer in those pictures that I talked about earlier, because I think, even like, Andy's spot on. And I think this visual thing too, of keeping it simple, if you can create a picture of it, it's going to be simpler. And it's also much more powerful to show versus tell. A picture tells 1,000 words. And I think it makes it easy for people to get their head around what these things are. But it also forces some simplicity too, when you can draw a picture around it. Or if the picture is so complex that, it's obvious to somebody who's, maybe not a people expert, maybe not a tech expert, but you can see all these complexities. It's amazing how bought into people get once they start to see what is probably causing their pain.
Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing too is, like, if people, I think like that minimum viable product thing, like, that's huge for me coming out of the software background. Like that, I totally agree with that. I think, so I won't repeat that, but I just want to emphasize that, yes, that's, I think that's super important. The two things I've seen, one is when people like use fancy software to automate a process people hate. Like that's one huge problem. And I think the other one, it kind of comes back to a little bit of that involving people in designing the process. I remember working somewhere where we rolled out this massive learning and development thing, super slick, everything else. But when you looked at our engagement data, it wasn't solving any of our top 5 or 6 issues. So again, measure, figure out what the problem is. What is the human thing we need to do first? Hopefully it's not like purely a resource thing. And then it's the transformation before the digital. So what are we doing for humans? How are we transforming? How would we measure that at the beginning of the end? And then, yeah, to use this sort of iterative process, because like the example I gave earlier, like we did a great job at rolling out software, and then we realized that the workflow didn't work. And then we fixed that. And then it was like, well, people don't know how to set a development goal. So yeah, I think those are some of the big pitfalls.
Thank you, Jeff. So, I mean, we have around 10 minutes left. Suggest we go once round, and maybe everybody can give an advice or an idea what people should be looking at in terms of who's ahead of the competition, or what would you suggest to read, to really catch up a little bit with the topic, and then maybe add another 1 or 2 sentences to wrap up the session from your point of view. Maybe we start with Andi.
What would I recommend? Well, you know, something that I'm quite excited about, if I can give a plug for it, and that's the Josh Bersin Academy. Chris will know about that. IBM have been involved. You know, Josh Bersin is probably one of the leading thinkers in this space, and he's done a lot of work now to actually create an academy to bring people like us together to, you know, to look at HR issues. There's some great education there. So if you want to get educated, I would recommend that. In terms of things that we're doing in IBM, we recently produced a skills study, the Enterprise Guide to Closing the Skills Gap, which strangely for a tech company is the kind of most downloaded research paper on our website. So that's got some really good insights about actually what skills organizations need in the future. So I do some research, and I also build your network as well. So, you know, get to talk to great people like Manisha who are doing this stuff real time and get insights from them as to what kind of challenges they're facing. That's me.
Thank you, Andi. Chris, do you want to follow?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of it I've said already. You know, have a strategy. You know, know where things stand. Do a visual representation of your systems, processes. You know, data flows. You know, I think creating that helps you understand where your pain is. You know, I do think, you know, just getting into a constant learning, you know, learn design thinking, you know, be data literate, you know, shift your mindset from, you know, being that expert to more of an engagement model, you know, focused on solving problems. You know, I'll give a little plug, you know, as well, just because, you know, everything that I'm doing at Bersin and all of our analysts are doing right now is to build out not only research, but, you know, strategy tools, you know, toolkits, resources, sensing and analytic products. You know, everything that I've focused on in our HR tech strategy section is all on strategy and AI and HR. And, you know, just look for tools, and yeah, look for your network contacts of people that you can learn from as well, because there's no best practices right now. We're innovating. So, you know, it's how do we get ideas from each other?
Yeah, perfect. It's not one size fits all. It's definitely tailoring it, demand specific to your company, your people, and figuring out what makes sense for you, right?
Right, exactly.
So, Jeff, how do you see it?
I think, again, we're, you know, we have a mutual admiration society here. I think we're definitely on the same page. You know, I would say the one other little thing I'd say to people, as you're doing this using iterative approach, try to find the right tool for your solution. A lot of stuff now uses, you know, open APIs and everything else. You can connect different things. I like the best tool for what you're trying to do versus trying to use one tool and then it's got like different modules in it that are kind of okay for about the same price as another tool that can do it perfectly. So don't be afraid of using multiple tools. And I think the one offer we would have for people is if you go to our site, SupportingLines.com, we have a leader evaluation you can take. Our experience is people usually get this pretty close to the mark. It's 32 questions. It looks at how teams align, how they collaborate, and how leaders help people grow. And to me, if you're trying to figure out like what is that human front end of your transformation, I think that evaluation would give you a great place to start. I can put it here in the chat.
And then we make the round to Manisha.
So I agree with what Andy and Chris and Jeff have said already. So build partnership. It's really about catching the idea, what's working well in the market, because there's no best practice. Then second is start with the problems, most important pressing problem for your organization to solve, prioritize, because you don't have all the money to solve all the problems. So prioritize, and then start small and co-create solutions. Partnership with ecosystem, which is tech players, tech enablers, and research providers is key to success.
Very much. So we have just a few minutes left. If there's anything the audience really would like to know, it's your chance to hack in a few questions, statements, and we're taking the last minutes to really take a look at that. Just maybe give it a few seconds, see whether anything is coming up. And while we wait for that, is there anything we missed in the discussion? Any advice you still want to give the audience?
I just want to say it's very rewarding and challenging time simultaneously for digital HR folks. We are in a fortune seat. We can create huge impact. We just need to stay vigilant, enthusiastic, and continuously upskill ourselves. A big area of opportunity for your personal career growth and for you to impact your organization.
I think that's a great kind of closing comment from Manisha there, because I do think that the future is all about skills. Not only, I think, are skills the new business currency, I mean, the big decision that the HR function has got to make, how do you build them? How do you buy them? How do you reinvent them? And they're going to be the means that organizations are going to transform. The other reality, of course, is that the shelf life of skills is decreasing. So something that you learned 5 years ago is going to be half as relevant to today. So that is a big challenge, not just for us in the corporate space, but it's a macroeconomic issue. It's a government policy decision. How do we reskill the next generation so that they can live in an AI automated world? And again, I think the HR function should be leading in helping helping the workforce reinvent itself, deciding what skills it needs, and helping people navigate their careers in the organization. So it's as Vinod says, it's skills.
I think also too, to pick up on something you said earlier, Andy, I think that a great closing thing that you said earlier in the presentation is that the time for HR is now. And I also, if you think about macroeconomic and societal, so if Gallup's data is right that so many people in the world are disengaged, think about what that means. Think about the level of service that we would all individually give when we're fully engaged or when we're not. So think about the impact that has on hospitals, schools, someone who's making your food in a restaurant, someone who's driving around your Uber. Like this, not only is the time for HR now, this is not a company thing. This is a much, much bigger thing that we're talking about, which is not just achieving goals and having great companies, but it's if we can improve the human experience of work. We actually, that to me is something that is transformational in society.
I think too, the last thing I'll weigh in on is there's a good bit of inertia right now. I think this is super overwhelming for people. There's a lot of great thinking and a lot of great stuff coming out from so many people that I am certain it's overwhelming. But the inertia is a dangerous thing right now. Putting some of this stuff into play, focus on finding resources on how to start doing that. We've talked about a lot of that here today, but there's a huge gap that we're seeing in what the awareness is of all of this stuff that you need to do and the actual readiness, and in that massive gap across every single trend that we're seeing is an opportunity for organizations to get ahead. And if it is all about being competitive against business model threats, competition threats, talent threats, all of these things that companies are facing, inertia is not going to be the way to combat it. You have to do something. So I'd love to think big, start small, move fast concept, but do something. You know, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Thank you, Chris. I think that's perfect last words. Yeah, do something. So thank you very much for all of you listening to us today in this panel discussion. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Manisha, for joining us and having that discussion. You can find us all. And if the panelists want, of course, they can also put in their contact details here in the chat. And therewith, I think we are perfectly on time, and Rike will be very pleased with us. Thank you very much. Have a great day, great morning, great evening around the world, and see you in one of the other sessions.
Thanks a lot.